King Robert still lived, and Lord Eddard Stark had just survived an ambush by Jaime Lannister in King's Landing. We were the King's men, charged by the King's hand to bring the King's justice to the false knight Gregor Clegane, who was raping and murdering the King's subjects in the Riverlands. To be honest, I cared more about the King's cellars, but I joined Lord Beric for the adventure. And maybe a grateful milkmaid or two. Ser Gregor isn't called the Mountain because of his subtlety, yet he took us by surprise at the Mummer's Ford. He'd hidden his men on both banks, and as we crossed, he fell upon us from the front and rear.
Oh, that's another thing I got time I watched this list. Why they
arm off and kill the
recast it? Some of the actors
were simply ridden down and drowned. The survivors spotted my damn red cloak and rallied around me, and we cut our way free. 100 men we'd been that morning. By dark, only 40 were left, and Lord Beric looked to make us 39 before morning. I drew a foot of lance from his chest and poured boiling wine into the hole it left, but I knew there was no hope. When his light failed, I shut his eyes, placed my hands on his cold chest, and mumbled a half-remembered blessing over his body, because he was my commander and my friend, and I didn't know what else to do. Then, I felt his heart thud beneath his breast. His body shuddered as the fire of life rekindled inside it. I used to joke that I became a red priest because the robes hid the wine stains, but the wine itself hid an unbelieving heart. When Beric's eyes opened, so did mine. I fell to my knees and praised the one true God and begged forgiveness for my ways. I don't know if the Lord heard me, but when dawn came, Beric was still alive and stronger than he'd been. He told us that our war hadn't ended at the Mummer's Ford, but begun, and that every fallen brother would be avenged. We were so few, though, that all we could do was harry the Lannisters' rear. Luckily, all they could do was kill Beric. A Lannister mace shattered his helm and skull. A noose snapped his neck after he surrendered himself to save a beekeeper and his wife. The mountain's dirt pierced his eye through his visor. After each time, I stood over his corpse and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord brought him back. Then we heard that Robert was dead, and Lord Eddard too. We'd been sent.
This is who. Wow, I'm a fucking goofball. I don't know if, like I said, the season premiere of season 3 hasn't been posted yet. So I don't know when I said when it came to bringing Jon back, because the most recent thing I was thinking of, because it was a while since we've seen the Brotherhood without banners. Most recent thing I was thinking of was the mountain. So I'm like, I want to make sure everything's straight with you, my guy. Like, I know y'all doing different methods, but you know what I'm saying, like I said, I'm not reading a book, and I'm not currently watching videos from people who've been reading a book. So I don't know the rules when it comes to this. So I was like, I don't know if it's one and the same or this is two completely different things. I know Qyburn doing some different shit. That's I don't know about those.
And to deal with outlaws, but now we were the outlaws, and Lord Tywin was the hand of the king. Some wanted to yield. We'd been sent by the king's hand to deal with outlaws, but now we were the outlaws, and Lord Tywin was the hand of the king. Some wanted to yield, but Beric wouldn't hear of it. We were still king's men, he said, and these were the king's people the lions were savaging. If we could not fight for Robert, we would fight for them, until every man of us was dead. We'd lost the king's banner at the Mummer's Ford, but then the countryside was awash with sigils and armies anyway. We became the Brotherhood without banners. Beric led us in battle, and I led us in prayer, and the Lord of Light led us in everything. When the heralds proclaimed the end of the War of the Five Kings, none of us thought of yielding. Our war wasn't over. The generals had gone home, but the soldiers stayed. Either they had no homes to return to, or they'd gotten a taste for other peoples. The Brotherhood was the people's only defense. We became the brothers of murdered siblings, husbands of murdered wives, and fathers of murdered children, led by a murdered man. Once we sought to bring the king's justice to the realm. Now we bring the Lord's, or at least we try.
The North is the oldest and largest of the Seven Kingdoms, but House Stark has not always held it. When Bran the Builder raised Winterfell and founded our line, we were vassals to the Barrow Kings, who claimed descent from
Just
the
the first
King
time
and thus
you got
dominion
one.
over all the First Men. But after the long night, it was our house who built the wall and set the Night's Watch to guard the realms of men, whilst our king sat in his barrow. My ancestors eventually revolted, waging what singers call the 1,000 Years' War, to free our lands. Other families joined us, recognizing that the North is a cold and hard land and needed a king who served its people before himself. Finally, the last Barrow King bent the knee, and House Stark became the kings of winter. Yet we were kings in name only, for by then the North had fractured into petty kingdoms, and my ancestors would struggle to unite it again for thousands of years. Roderick Stark wrestled an Ironborn lord for Bear Island and granted it to House Mormont when he won. A younger son of our family, Carlon Stark, won his own keep after he put down a rebellion and founded House Karstark, one of the most powerful in the North. When the Manderleys were
They ended
exiled
up
from the
switching
Reach,
it up.
my ancestors shielded them and gave them a home at the mouth of the White Knife, in return for holding the river against pirates and invaders. Now they're one of the wealthiest houses in the North. I'm not so naive to pretend that the entire North welcomed Stark rule. The last Warg King was slain at Sea Dragon Point along with all his sons and beasts. The last Marsh King died at the hands of King Rickard Stark, and House Reed has held the swamps of the Neck ever since. Houses Greenwood, Towers, Amber, Frost. None survive today as more than names in dusty old books.
Okay, because
But
I'm
my
like, I haven't heard of
ancestors never
those.
wanted to destroy their foes' root and stem. The Umbers of Last Hearth and the Glovers of Deepwood Motte bent the knee and became loyal vassals of House Stark. The Red Kings of House Bolton wore cloaks made from the skins of Stark princes they'd flayed, and one of the Boltons was even known as the Red Arm because he liked to plunge an arm into the bellies of captive Starks and pull out their entrails with his bare hand. The North deserved to be wiped clean of them. Yet
Facts.
my ancestors spared them after their defeat because they believed the North couldn't afford to fight itself any longer. Time soon proved them right. When the Andals swept into Westeros, they obliterated all the kingdoms of the First Men except the North. Each of the southern kingdoms fought the invaders on its own, but the North fought as one. When the Andals tried to sail up the White Knife, the Manderleys fell on their ships. When the Andals tried to march an army through the Neck, the Reeds fell on their soldiers. King Theon Stark even sailed his own army to the Andal homeland for vengeance and slew hundreds of Andal warriors. When he returned, he planted their heads on spikes along our coasts, a warning to other would-be conquerors. The warning was heeded for thousands of years, until Aegon the Conqueror. The south had already fallen to Aegon and his dragons, only the north remained. My ancestor, King Torrhen Stark, marched the north down to the Trident and beheld Aegon's army, larger than Torrhen's own by half, and with 3 dragons circling overhead. Many northern bannermen wanted to attack anyway, claiming northern valor would carry the day. Others wanted to fall back to Moat Cailin and make a stand there. But Torrhen had heard how the armies of the Rock and the Reach had burned on the field of fire, and had seen the fires still glowing beneath the rubble of Harrenhal. He knelt and laid his ancient crown at Aegon's feet, and rose a king no more but Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Some northerners still sneer at my ancestor as the king who knelt, forgetting that because of Torrhen they're alive today to
Exactly.
sneer. Their ancestors didn't leave their burned bones at the Trident, and their twisted swords didn't fill Aegon's new throne. Now many say that House Stark is dead and gone, and House Bolton holds the North. But the North remembers who united it. The North remembers who defended it, and the North remembers who stole it. Long ago, my ancestors spared the Boltons, trusting their oaths of fealty. I shall correct that mistake. Even the North can forget when there's nothing left to remember.
In the long and glorious history of men butchering each other, we riverfolk make the best meat. How else can you explain why anyone would stay in a land of constant carnage for thousands of years? If it wasn't the first men killing the children.
At first. Okay, yeah. All right, cool. It was marriage. Okay, bet. Cause at first, like, this was one of those things where I didn't even like stop to think about it. But it was just one of those things where it's just like, I asked myself a question, and then I immediately, like, just stopped thinking about the question. So basically, when we had Unc at River Run, I'm sitting there like, this is your home. And I was thinking, Tully and Vale. No, alright, so it was Aaron, and then by marriage, and Tully came around. Okay. That makes more sense.
The forest here, it was the Andals killing the first men, and then each other. Even when the Riverlands finally united behind the kings of House Justman, the unusual silence of peace attracted the Storm Lords Westerman and those bloody Arnborn to try and take our grain, gold, and women. The problem is, and has always been, that the Riverlands have no natural defenses. Unlike the North, we don't have the neck to keep invaders waist-deep in muck. Unlike the Vale, we don't have mountains with narrow passes easily defended by stable boys with slings. Unlike Dawn, we don't have a blazing sun and, well, the Dornish. My ancestors may have had a funny taste in sigils, but they knew one thing. If you plan on staying in the Riverlands, you'd better have a strong castle. My ancestor, Axel Tully, bright man that he was, realized that most soldiers can't swim, and raised his castle of Riverrun where the Red Fork and the Tumblestone rivers meet. He built right up to the water on each side, daring attackers to force a crossing. If they wore armor, they'd drown. If they didn't, our archers would feather them from the battlements as they paddled. An army could still assault Riverrun from the west, however, so my ancestors dug a wide moat along our western wall, connecting the rivers on either side of the castle. When any would-be conquerors showed up, we opened a series of gates and flooded the moat, transforming Riverrun into an island fortress with enough stores to last years. As the invaders starved in their camps, they'd watch us fish off our walls, just for variety. And because we were bored, eventually they all skulked home. In the 1,000 years that Riverrun has stood, not once has it been taken by force. It's a proper castle. You want to? You have to marry into it. Even the damned Freys knew that much. Up-jump toll collectors living on a bridge instead of beneath it like the rest of their kind. But finally, a Lord of the Crossing passed off one of his Brute's liege lord, House Tully. My nephew Edmure. People say Lord Walder arranged the Red Wedding to punish Robb Stark. I say he did it just as much to steal Riverrun. They've always envied our castle. Maybe they think two rivers can wash off the filth that coats them. They'll never know. The Lannisters could grant Riverrun to the Freys for 1,000 years, but that doesn't mean they can have it. Do you think it was hard to convince Tully's soldiers to turn against the Freys? Do you think we won't enjoy watching them simper as winter bears down on their pitiful camp?
Bro got his feet up in some more shit.
I carved a new fishing rod for the occasion. When the starving Freys look up at our walls, we'll wave our trouts at them.
That gotta be a huge flex. They out there just starving, trying to keep you locked in.
As a boy,
you just
you
fish and hit him with a.
sometimes of being not a Stark of Winterfell, but a Dane of Starfall. Legend has it that the Dornish founder of House Dane followed a falling star to where it hit the ground, and there he raised his castle. A fantastic story, I know, but House Dane has a relic to prove it. Dawn, the most famous sword in Westeros. Forged from the fallen star's cold heart, and as strong and sharp as Valyrian steel. Many houses have ancestral swords passed from father to eldest son, like my own family's ice. But Dawn doesn't pass to the Lord of House Dane by right. To wield Dawn, a knight of their house must first be deemed worthy. It doesn't matter if he's the Lord, a younger brother, or a distant cousin. If none are found to be worthy, the blade stays on the mantle in Starfall until the next generation. But Dawn hasn't rested there often. From House Dane have risen some of the greatest warriors in Westeros. Vorian Dane, who was a king and the greatest knight in Dawn before he was defeated by Nymeria. Because of his honor and his prowess, she sent him to the wall in golden fetters and took his heir as her husband. Joffrey Dane, who answered Aegon the Conqueror's demand to submit by invading Aegon's 7 kingdoms and marching an army to the gates of Old Town, where Aegon had been crowned. And the greatest of them all, Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. During the reign of the Mad King, a band of outlaws calling themselves the Kingswood Brotherhood terrorized the forest outside of King's Landing. Every force sent after them either returned empty-handed or vanished into the woods, never to be seen again. The king was furious and dispatched Sir Arthur of his own Kingsguard to deal with the threat. Sir Arthur didn't put the villagers to the question or set fire to the woods to smoke out the Brotherhood, as other forces had done. He paid the small folk for the food his men ate, brought their grievances to the king, even won them the right to take a few of the king's deer during the autumn. The forest folk had looked to the outlaws to defend them, but Sir Arthur did more for them than the outlaws could ever hope to do. When a villager led Sir Arthur and his knights to the outlaws' secret camp, the Brotherhood, to their credit, didn't flee. One of their leaders, the Smiling Knight, was a madman. Cruelty and honor jumbled together. But he didn't know fear, not even when Sir Arthur drew Dawn before him. Soon the outlaw's longsword had so many notches that Sir Arthur stopped to let him fetch a new one. The robber knights chose another and then asked for Dawn. Sir Arthur replied, "Then you shall have it." The Smiling Knight never smiled again. The mad fool. Dawn is just a sword. Sir Arthur was the true steel. Strong, brave, and loyal to a fault. He would never have aided Rhaegar's abduction of my sister if his vows hadn't compelled him. And though we fought on opposite sides, I admired him. When I was younger, I wanted to be him. Every boy did. And I killed him. Not in single combat, but as he was on his knees, a dagger in his back. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He wasn't angry.
Well, that was the...
He'd done his duty to
That was
the
a
last,
man doing a
found it dishonorable.
two-handed joint, man.
And even though he knew what awaited me in that tower. Sir Arthur Dane died the greatest knight who ever lived. After Robert's coronation, I returned Dawn to Starfall. One day, House Dane will raise a worthy successor to Sir Arthur. Until then, Dawn gathers dust above the fire, with the dream of every boy in Westeros.
I was clouding homeboy, but he was really holding his own.
The War of the Nine Penny Kings, they called it.
Not just
I
in
never
story
saw a
wise,
king
like
or
choreography
earned a
too.
penny. After the war ended, I heard it all started when an exiled
Usually when
royal
they be doing
bastard
choreography
raised an
with two
army of
swords, it'd be like,
sellswords,
dude,
and
like
the
just
rightful
use one.
king sent his own army to stop an invasion. Sounds simple the way the maesters tell it, but an army isn't like a dog that comes when you whistle. The king calls on great lords, who call on lesser lords, who send out their captains to round up all the peasant men on the land the lord claims to own. If the lord is wise and generous, His new soldiers are given steel swords and wooden shields to fight his battles. Most of our army fought with sharp sticks. Singers still sing of the valiant heroes made in the war. Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, Sir Tywin Lannister, and Prince Aerys Targaryen, Sir Barristan Selmy the Bold, who slew the bastard Pretender and ended the war at a stroke. But the king whose crown we were defending never came. He mattered too much, I suppose. His hand commanded the crown's armies and died valiantly in his son's arms. Or so the singers say. I never saw that either. I did see the soldiers when they came to our village. They declared I was too young to fight, but my brothers and friends were all going and I wouldn't be left behind. My oldest brother said I could be his squire, though he wasn't a knight, just a potboy armed with a stolen kitchen knife. He'd never need it. I saw him collapse on the march from fever, along with many from our village. I saw our shoes fall apart on the road, our clothes rot off our bodies, and half of us shitting our beds from the sickness and fear. And then we got to the war. In the stepstones, I saw a mace cave in my last brother's head. I saw the lord who led us there cut down, and some other lords shout that we were his now. One day I looked around and realized all my friends and kin were gone. I was fighting beside strangers under a banner I'd never seen. Didn't know where I was or how to get home. When a lord rode up shouting at us to form ranks with our scythes and hoes, I couldn't remember which side I was on. Then the knights came down on us, faceless men, all in steel, and the thunder of their charge filled the world. I closed my eyes. Years later, after the war had faded into songs, I opened them again and saw what I had done and what I had become in the war and since. I went looking for a way back home. I know I'll never reach it, but that doesn't mean I don't need a guide.
Between the free cities and the bones, between the shivering sea and Slaver's Bay, spreads the Dothraki Sea. Named not for its waters, but for how freely its conquerors roam upon it. A traveler on the Dothraki Sea will find few villages and no farms, because the Dothraki view it as a sin to cut into their Mother Earth with plows and shovels. And the Dothraki know only one punishment. The closest the Dothraki approach to civilization is Vaes Dothrak. Though to outsiders it doesn't look like a city. There are no walls, because the Dothraki believe only cowards hide behind them, instead of facing an enemy blade in hand. But the Dothraki couldn't do that here either. Within the bounds of the city, no one, not even the mightiest Khal, may carry a blade, by order of the priestesses of the Dosh Khalid. Not that any enemy would be foolish enough to attack the sacred city of the Dothraki in the first place. Two giant bronze stallions rear over the entrance to the city, their hooves meeting in the air to form an arch, the famous Horse Gate. Through it is the God's Way, where the Dothraki drag the sacred idols of the cities and peoples they've broken. Along one side, stone gods look down on you from cracked thrones with chipped and stained faces, their names lost to time. Across the road, monsters watch you pass, black iron dragons with jewels for eyes, roaring griffins, manticores with barbed tails poised to strike, and other terrible beasts from every corner of Essos. But there is nothing to fear. If these gods and devils had any power, they would never have ended here. Not all foreign gods in Vaes Dothrak are broken. In the famous eastern and western markets, merchants worship their god of trade with the sufferance of the Dothraki, who themselves don't understand buying and selling. The western market is a great square of beaten earth filled with animal pens, drinking halls, and a maze of stalls and crooked aisles. Even goods from Westeros find their way here, though the merchants who sell them wouldn't know a Lannister from a Frey. The eastern market is fittingly a stranger place. The elders of the Dosh Khalid view it with suspicion, and most Dothraki stay away. They aren't wrong. The great elephants, the basilisks and silver cages, and the striped black and white horses of the Yorghos Nai are harmless enough. But I can see how the elders wouldn't want their younger members to see the warrior maids of Hir Kun, who wear iron rings in their nipples and rubies in their cheeks. Or listen to the Shadow Men, who cover their bodies with tattoos and hide their faces behind
Tattoos.
masks and whisper dark secrets for a price. This is all of Vaes Dothrak that foreigners ever know. For only Dothraki are permitted into the inner city, where the Dosh Khaleen live out their lives. A blood rider, drunk on fermented mare's milk, once told me that the Dosh Khaleen are stewards. They prepare for the day when every rider of every Khalasar shall return to the city. And the Dothraki truly will be one blood and one Khalasar again, under the greatest Khal of all, the stallion who mounts the world. He will ride to the ends of the earth and grind nations into dust, and take the whole world as his herd. Or so the prophecy goes. Yet the world is vast, with many places a horse can't go. The stallion who mounts the world couldn't rear above a mountain range, or leap across the sea. Still, the world has been conquered before, just not with stallions.